Hello, welcome back to Painting with Auntie Julie. Today we're going to look at doing this little primrose scene. Quite a simple little picture, nice sign of spring, but it involves a bit of negative painting back behind the flowers. Okay, so let's make a start. Okay, I've got my piece of watercolour paper down here. First thing we're going to do is draw out some little primrose flowers like these on here. I would suggest you get a piece of scrap paper. This is just photocopy paper, something nice and thin to draw onto first. What you don't want to do is get lots of pencil lines on your watercolour paper. So we're going to rough it out onto here, which means I can use lots of construction lines to draw with. We're going to draw the flowers, and to draw flowers, if you draw a circle first, draw the centre point, and then draw the petals around that, it will show you how to build up a little flower shape, and you can alter them and change them to make them look correct. So the best thing to do is try to work from nature. I haven't got any primroses here with me at the moment, but at least you can see the idea of how to build up the flowers. It's nice to get a few overlapping each other. So another little circle, think about where it's going to go, and then you can just put on a few petals coming around the edge. They tend to just start at the centre and then come back to the outside edges. If you want to do one on its side, if you just do an ellipse, like a saucer shape, put the centre point in and then bring the petals out to the edges, that will give you the effect of a little flower on its side there, and the stem will come somewhere from the centre here. Drawing it out on a scrap piece of paper is very useful because then it gives you a chance to alter things, move things around, leave all your construction lines on there, so you don't have to worry too much about changing things. If you do it on your pristine piece of watercolour paper, you might find that you want to move a flower around somewhere or put it in a slightly different place, which is then difficult to do if you've done all your accurate drawing on there. Okay, so just a few more moments and I will have a few flowers in place, something like this. Try and think of an odd number of flowers. It works better than an even number. When you're doing, it's just like flower arrangings, odd numbers always work a little bit better than an even number. So as you're drawing flowers, just think they've all got to come back to get onto the stem somewhere in the middle there. So just make sure that they all will fit back onto a centre point. Don't worry too much about the accuracy of these, as long as they're vaguely round and have got little petal shapes on there, the eye will make up the rest. Let's put another oval one in, just another slightly circular one, but on its side. So again, I've just drawn the little oval first, centre point, and then just put some petals coming out to this outside edge. Quite nice to get one or two not going right back all the way around, so you can get some cuts back in. There we go, and a centre point there. Perhaps a bud or two coming up. And then just a few leaves, and these are like ellipses. Or do you think we need another one in there? Might put another one in here. Look, perhaps another little flower just tucking away underneath the others there. Or I can rub them out and move them if I needed to. Okay, right, so just a few more leaves. Just they come out flat and they come out sideways. So this is how I tend to start a lot of drawings. I will create a little cheat sheet for myself. So rough it out on here. So then if it all goes horribly wrong in the first few moments, the first time I put a bit of paint on there, I can just very quickly draw it again onto my piece of paper without worrying too much about it. I think that flower needs to come a little bit bigger, or you can change it as you go. So something like that will be the basis of my sketch. So now I can transfer this design onto my watercolour paper. So to do that, I'm going to scribble on the back of it with a graphite stick or a soft pencil. So making sure that's all covered. That's pretty well there, a little bit more on the sides there. And then I can put it down into the middle of my watercolour paper. Perhaps just a little bit more at the top than at the bottom, a bit more space at the top, a little less at the bottom, and go back over the lines. Okay, I'm just going to carry on to do this. You see, it's just going to transfer on there. So if you want to catch up with me in a moment when you've done your cheat sheet, I shall see you in a few moments. Okay, so I've now transferred the sketch over onto my watercolour paper, just keeping the pencil lines fairly faint, but at least I know they're going to be in the right places now, and all the flowers are going to be the right sort of size. So with watercolours, you always start with your weakest, wettest washes first of all. So this is the background washes. We're going to keep them quite watery, and we're going to just put some of the colours in for the flowers, for the leaves, for the background. So it's just like putting an undercoat on there. So I'm going to mix up a bit of lemon yellow. I've got some of them mixed up here already. Take a little bit of paint, mix it down with a bit of water to give me a lemon yellow. A bit of cadmium yellow, which is a slightly warmer yellow. Don't get too hung up on the particular makes of colours there. That you could use a gambos, you could use various other colours of yellow, and the same with the lemon yellow. It doesn't have to be lemon yellow, it could be pale hue, cadmium yellow. It really is not too important with that. We also want to put a bit of colour down the bottom here, so a bit of burnt sienna for the earth, and perhaps even a bit of burnt umber there. I've got a bit of blue here, ultramarine blue, so we're going to put a bit of that into it. But if I mix a little bit of yellow with it, it will go a green colour, so quite a useful little background colour there we're going to use. And I've got another bit of a green mixed up there, same sort of colours, but a bit more, perhaps a bit more blue into it. So now the colours are there. Always mix your colours up ready and waiting first of all. I'm going to wet the paper all over. So wet it with a soft brush, a mop brush. This is how it puts plenty of water onto your paper, so it stays glossy wet. Although I'm putting water all over, I might not go completely to the edges. Well, I'm not going to go completely to the edges with this wash, but I'm going to put the water way beyond where I want it to go. And this is a good habit to get into. So it's not going to form a line where the paint runs up to the edge of the water on this particular one. So that's nicely coated all the way off the piece of paper here. This is Bockingford. I think it's either 300 gram or 425 gram weight. So it's quite a sturdy piece of paper. So once that's wet and it's staying wet, I'm just going to tilt that board a bit. I don't know if you can see that on there, but it's nice and wet. There's no dry patches and it's staying glossy wet with no puddles in there. I'm just taking any puddles off the bottom here. Have your board slightly tilted so you always get if there is a puddle, it's going to be at the bottom. So now we're going to put the background on, and we're just going to start with the palest colours first, and just splodge them generally around the picture. Just let them come into the picture. If they go into the background a bit, it doesn't matter. It's just going to look like distant flowers. In with the next colour. So you have to have these colours fairly mixed up, ready and waiting, so you can do this pretty quickly. So I'm not really worrying that I'm just putting the yellow into the yellow flowers. We're going to bring these out a little bit later with other colours. A bit of the greeny colours, vaguely where the leaves are going to go. Doesn't really matter too much if they're not in exactly the same position, or if they overlap the flower a bit. It really is not vital at this stage. And just bringing a few of those out, perhaps a bit of green somewhere towards this background area. Just going to clean the brush before I go into the completely different colour, which is the brown. And again, this is a bit burnt sienna perhaps. Just again, a few patches of that, not too high up with the burnt sienna. Just a little bit, and a little bit of burnt umber in between some of these flowers, just to give me a little bit of variation. Doesn't matter if you overlap your flowers, it'll just add to the interest into them. And that's it. I'm going to just let it dry out now at this stage, just touching it with my brush, take off any little puddles so it doesn't look too wet, and then we'll just leave it to dry. Or you can dry it with a hairdryer at this stage. Okay, that's nice and dry now. It has to be bone dry before you start doing the next stage. And you can check that by feeling it with the back of your hand. If it's still cold, it means it's still damp, so it has to be bone dry. Otherwise, the moment you touch this background, it will start to lift back off again. So hopefully you've had a little cup of tea and let all your background dry out. So we're going to start working in between these background flowers now. So we're not going to touch the flowers at all themselves at the moment. We're just going to work the background. This is called negative painting. So we're working into and around the flowers, not the flowers themselves. So I've mixed up the colours I'm going to use into the background. So we're going to have a little bit of a blue, ultramarine blue. Perhaps it doesn't matter if there's a touch of yellow in there as well to make it a little bit more greeny. Or you can just have the blue on its own, a little bit of that. So I don't try and mix the colours up too thoroughly so that you get a different shade every time you put it on there. And there's a little bit of green here as well. So this is behind these flowers. So before we start, what we're going to do is use some clean water and mop brush, and we're going to put water on around and away from the flowers. You've got to put the water on so it goes a long way away from the flowers, because paint will try and run up to where you've put the water, leaving the flowers themselves dry, leaving it quite close to the flowers there, but just making sure it flicks away from the flowers themselves. Just going to take out any puddles that I've left on there. So I'm just going to control that water now, taking off any puddles. Now I'm going to get a smaller brush and we're going to tickle in some of this paint, just letting it go into this background. It's going to make the background quite a bit darker, and just bringing it up to the edges of the flowers. So this is going to bring the background in and around the flowers, pulling it down. You can see how the little stem's starting to show up, how the flowers are starting to come out of the background. Then you're just going to let that fade away to bring it darker towards the middle. So it goes quite dark. Whatever you do one side of a flower, make sure you put the same colour in the other side, so it looks like it's flowing through behind the background here. So this bit where it's close up to the flowers is dry, but then as it comes into the background it's going to blur into the distance. So again, we'll just put a bit more onto here and just gently bring that round. Got a little bit too much of a puddle there, so I'm just going to take that out a little bit by drying my brush. I'm just taking a bit of the puddle out there. So dry it on a bit of kitchen roll or tissue of some sort. Now when people are doing this, they get the hang of doing this, but they tend to just do, as I've done there, just a line around the edge, and that can look very contrived. It can look a bit too clinical with that. So when you're putting this on, make sure you take it further into that background where you've wet right up to here, but you're just putting in some of those colours further away, so it's not giving you an exact line around the edge of the flower there. Just a little bit more water onto this bit so it fades to nothing down the bottom there. You can vary your colour a little bit, perhaps put a little bit of blue in as well to give it a bit of brightness. Again, while it's still wet, you can just keep going with that. There's a little bit of a stem in there. This bit's dry down here, so we'll just work carefully up to the edges of the primroses, and hopefully that's starting to make them look like they're coming out of the background. Got a bit of green at the top there. So as long as it's still wet, you can keep adding colours, making it a little bit darker, controlling where it's coming up to the flowers, and just forming the shapes of the tops of these petals into the background there. I'm going to just make this area, as it comes into the centre here, just a bit stronger and darker with the green. So I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue and cadmium yellow, and then just while it's still wet, just pop that in to make it stronger and darker as it comes towards the centre of the clump. This is still wet, so if it's gone dry, don't touch it, just leave it alone. I'll just lose that little bit in there. So I think hopefully you can start to see how these flowers are coming out of the darkness. Making that, let's make that a little bit stronger down here. Building it up gradually. Comes a point where you have to just let that bit dry again. So while that part's drying, we're going to put a leaf here, so that's going to cover that little mark in the corner. We can do a little bit down the bottom. Same thing again, mop brush, and we're just going to wet it below the flowers, fairly close up to the flowers, over those leaves just at the moment. And let's build that one up there, across, oops, just got onto the flat, never mind. And again, we're just going to put a little bit of that colour, let's just make sure that goes a long way away from the picture, so just taking the water off the bottom of the paper, so the paint can't run up as far as the water is. And then again, we'll do a similar sort of thing just underneath that little bit of dark green, just underneath these flowers. The flower's edge is dry, but it will run back into the water to give you the shapes of these little petals. And again, just encourage it to go a little bit further than you think around the edges there. Only this time, we're also going to put a little bit of the dark brown in as well, just because it's where it's going back onto the earth. So just follow that one up there. So yes, little flowers gradually growing out of the picture there, and then perhaps a little bit of the burnt umber again, or burnt sienna, just to give you that little bit of dark. Again, push it away into that water so it can't catch up to that water. Okay, and again, now I'm going to just let that dry for a few moments. Okay, so that's dry again now. You can do it a smaller section at a time, so you can just gradually work around your picture, but it's nice to do a big area, then let it dry out. So now that was negative painting, so you can see you work the background around your flower petals to make the flowers look lighter from the background. This time we're going to put some leaves on here, and this is positive painting, where we're painting the leaves on top. So we want a couple of different shades of green, ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow, so don't mix them up too much so you can get different shades on the palette there. And this time we're going to wet one half of the leaf, just with a small brush now, just dibble some water on, just a little bit of water onto that, and a couple of little different shades. So this is one green, yellowy green, and then a bit of a darker green. I'm just going to put on, it's like dotting it on, because these little leaves are quite crinkly. Let's just keep it sharper up around the edge of that flower. They're quite crinkly, so you want to just dot it on to make it look like a little blurry leaf on the water there. So just clean my little brush, put the other half of the leaf on right up to the centre vein, but don't wet the centre vein. So we don't want it soaking wet, we're just trying to keep it slightly damp so the colours run a little bit. A bit of yellowy green into there, just dot it out from the centre outwards to make it look like the little crinkles on the flower petal there. And then a little bit of the darker green into that as well. The darker green has more blue with it, that always makes it quite a bit darker, so that will give you a little bit more shape. And again, we're doing a little bit of negative painting around this flower petal here to give you the shape of that, and just bring it up towards the centre. Leave that little centre vein dry, but just again vary that tone so it's not one flat colour and you've got some little bits of light into it, and that's a little leaf done. Just a dot or two more of the dark down the end there. So now we can move on to another leaf, the same sort of thing. Try and do one half of the time to start with. Once you get the hang of it, you can do a little bit quicker. You can do both halves at the same time. But what I'm trying to do is leave the centre vein without paint on it. So a little bit more, oops, I've just used the wrong yellow, never mind. Yellowy green to start with. Just dotting it on with a paler colour first. A bit of the stronger, darker green into it, not everywhere, just in some places, especially underneath the petals there, to make it a little bit darker as it tucks away. Do the same on the other side of the leaf, just clean my brush into the water, dot it on. So I'm just dotting the water on as well so doesn't go flat. Bit of the yellowy green coming out here first, up to the centre vein, leave the centre vein dry, and then to give it a bit more shape, a bit of the stronger, more bluey green, just join those together at the end there. Try and keep that little vein tighter together, just dotting it in to give you the shape of the little leaves there. join it at the bottom, and that's another little leaf. So I'm just going to keep going around here doing a few more with this method. Okay, so I've finished off the rest of those leaves. I haven't done much around these bottom ones, these lower ones down here, because it's quite dark already. So again, to make these leaves look like they're coming out against a dark background, we're just going to do a little bit more of negative painting. Do you want your mop brush, some clean water, and again just wetting under, making sure these are dry first of all. We're just wetting underneath this area off the bottom of the paper again. So clean water, as long as your paint's dry, it won't start to lift again, or shouldn't start to lift again, I should say. So now I'm going to make a darker colour, a bit of burnt umber and ultramarine blue, and we're just going to pop that in underneath these where it's dry here, but as you bring it out, we're going to touch it into that water. Again, be careful not just to do all round the edge of the leaf there. You see how contrived that would look if I left it like that. So what we're going to do is let this fuzz away into this water. Put a little bit more water on to make it blend a bit more easily. And then that makes that leaf look like it's pale on a darker background. Quite clever. I like negative painting. It's nice and quite powerful look to it. So you can see that bit's just far too contrived there, so just make sure you've got a bit of water on and it fades into the background there. I don't want to do it around every leaf, but just these lower ones here, so you can leave some positive painting and negative painting in your picture. Give it a bit of variation and it will look a lot better for it. So just put a little bit around that one to make that come out. So that's all the background, all the leaves done. We just want to tickle in a little bit of colour into those flowers themselves. So just a small brush, a little bit of cadmium yellow. We've got the main colour of the flower on there. So all we're going to do is just enhance that a little bit by putting a little bit of the centre in. Perhaps some of those little bits towards the middle of the flowers, just with a little bit of cadmium yellow where there's a joint there. Again, if you want to fade it away a little bit onto the flower petal, you can do, so it's not so bright and strong. We don't want to do it over every single petal because want to let that background delicate yellow show through to give you the little bit of the flower, and then pop in a little bit of green in the middle just to give it its centre, and that's one flower done. So again, with these now, we can just put a little bit of the cadmium yellow onto from the centre outwards, not all the way across every flower petal, just perhaps where there's a bit of a pencil line. You want to make one petal stand out from another. If it goes too stripy, clean brush, a little bit of water on, just onto the petal itself, and let it blur away into the background, and pop a little bit of green in the middle. Perhaps a bit too much, so I've just dried my brush and just taken the bit out. So keep going with those. A little bit of yellow from the centre out, and this is the cadmium yellow or the egg yellow, sometimes it's called a mid yellow, to just a slightly stronger shade rather than the lemon one, and just a little bit of water on those edges and a tiny bit of green towards the centre of the flower. Just leave those to dry for a moment, and I'll just come back and do some over this side. So it's hardly any colour into it because we've already put the colour on with the background. So it's just enhancing that a little bit. I might just put a bit of yellow onto that corner there because I've either got to do something with a negative space to make that edge stand out, or positive paint it to put the petal on so it stands out from the background there. Take those petals out, and then just a little bit of green in the middle. A few more to go. Yellow onto the petals, just where you got a little bit of the pencil lines, just from the centre outwards. Perhaps let some of them blur away into a tiny touch of water onto the petal. Okay, there's just one or two little things you might want to do on here just to make it stand out a little bit more, perhaps just a few veins on some of the leaves, just onto the dry paper this time, just to make those look a bit more interesting. But otherwise, that's how you produce a simple little picture using negative painting, painting the background rather than the flowers. If you want to see some more watercolour examples or lessons, which I've done, please visit my website artyjulie.com.